Welcome to We Are Perficient, a space dedicated to showcasing the knowledge and leadership of Perficient experts. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with Kevin Sheen, Vice President of Global Delivery at Perficient, who has played a pivotal role in the company's global expansion and success. With his expertise in managing large-scale operations and a relentless focus on operational excellence, Kevin has elevated the delivery of technological solutions to new heights. In this interview, we'll dive into his vision for staying ahead in a constantly evolving tech landscape and how Perficient continues to make a lasting impact in the global market. Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Of course, James.
Awesome, let's get to it. Since Perficient is the leading global digital consultancy, I would like to start to ask why it is so crucial for companies today to have their services delivered globally.
So I think it's I would even say more than crucial. It's almost inescapable. There are three main reasons. The first one is what everybody thinks about, which is cost savings, and I think that almost goes without saying, but it's worth mentioning because I think getting focused solely on cost would be a mistake for the other two reasons, the other two main reasons. The second reason, and I think even just as important, is in the ability to find great talent. If you restrict yourself to a small part of the globe or even a single city within that country, you're really restricting yourself from finding the best talent for your project and for what you want to get done or accomplished in the digital space. By looking across the entire planet, in all of the countries where that talent populates, you really are being able to tap into a global presence and being able to find the absolute best talent, and that's certainly what we found. The third reason, beyond scalability, beyond cost, is embracing the diversity of thought, embracing the diversity of creativity, of perspective that comes with having a truly global team. Again, if you restrict yourself to a particular city, a particular region, even a particular country, you're restricting that perspective, that global thought, that leadership, the shared experiences that team member has participated in that locale. So again, while it's inescapable that a company should embrace that global perspective, it's important for them to also realize those three reasons, and especially the two that go beyond cost, which is the ability to scale and the diversity of perspective that comes with a global team.
Well, that's awesome because you mentioned creativity, and I think that creativity is like a part of evolution, and that makes me kind of realize that Perficient is always evolving. So I would like to ask, how has Perficient model evolved over the years?
So that's a very introspective question because Perficient has had to adapt its model through the years. I mean, if you think back just, a decade ago, or maybe a little longer than that, just a little less than 10 years ago, we went from being really a company that was in a pretty niche spaces, still in digital, but pretty niche, in one country with about a couple hundred, 200 people. We now are across the planet in 11 different countries with over 7,500 colleagues delivering digital solutions. And in the course of doing that, of course, the thing that changes is you start taking on projects that are bigger and that are more complicated. And now throw on top of that the increase in complexity in the digital space, and we had to adapt. We couldn't stay to just the same methodologies and so forth. So let me kind of rewind a little bit back to when things were simpler and say we added our first country, our first country outside the US. And we had teams that were, 10, 12 people. Well, I think one of the things that we innovated very early on was using and embracing Agile, not just for teams that were located in the same place, but also teams that were located in those two countries working on that. And I will tell you, there was a lot of kind of bumpy lessons learned throughout that process of how to adapt Agile as a methodology to teams that look like that. As the teams started to grow, as projects got more complex, and as we started to have teams dispersed across not just two countries, but three countries, sometimes 4 or 5, and certainly different cities within those countries, we definitely recognized that Agile alone doesn't do that, and so you have to look at things like scaled Agile and other frameworks that work at Agile at scale, and how do you apply those to much larger teams and much more complex projects. And now fast forward to where we're at today, the evolutions that's happened, and you throw into that customers have adopted all sorts of hybrids, not only Agile, but all sorts of hybrids of Agile. Some of them are using scaled Agile frameworks, some of them are still using older PMO waterfall-based models, and we have to be able to adapt to all of those, because as we start dealing with more enterprise customers, we can't go in there and ask them to change the way they're doing everything. We have to adapt and weave into their methodology, their choice of methodology, and their choice of way of doing things in a way that still preserves that frictionless, seamless delivery environment, but also ensures the same level of quality that they had come to expect and we had come to demand from our smaller projects. So again, without getting, and we could talk for hours about the specifics of how we've adapted, one of the things that's helped with that adaptation has been how fast technology has moved to keep up with us. So I can recall not too long ago, probably less than 20 years ago, where I would be on a phone call over voice over IP in, say, India or China, and the lag caused us, we couldn't have a conversation like this even. I mean, there was a second to a second and a half lag. And now fast forward to today, and we've got pretty seamless video capabilities and video conferencing capabilities that allow teams to join all together and have daily stand-ups and enough overlap that's effective use of time. So I think the technology advancement has helped, but I think it's us also pushing for those technological improvements and how we integrate them and weave them into our methodology. That's also how we've evolved our way of delivering for customers.
Well, I think what you're mentioning is really interesting, because you talk about adaptation, evolution, but there's another need, and is differentiation. So I'm going to ask, how does Perficient differentiate its model from its competitors?
I struggle with this question because the answers sound, a lot of people will give the same answer. I think, so I'll just get out there. It starts with individuals. So you have to start with individual team members, and how are you treating that team member? How are you treating that person, no matter where they are? If they're in India, if they're throughout Latin America, here in Colombia, Medellin, Colombia, if they're in the US, how do you treat that individual? Do they feel like they're part of something? Do they feel like you are investing in them? Do they feel like they have opportunities to learn and grow and expand, maybe even outside the boundaries of their own locale, their country that they're in? Maybe with respect to the leadership role they may want to achieve. Are they able to really go after that? A lot of companies will say that. It's like, oh, it's all about the people. But we really kind of put our money where our mouth is. We really do stand behind that. We actually have something called the Perficient Promise, which says that we commit as leaders, all of us, to challenge, to champion, and to celebrate our people. And we live that every single day. And so, and every single thing I'm going to talk about here with regard to differentiation, we put kind of, processes or more importantly, values around those things, so that we are thinking about how we emphasize that differentiation on a daily basis, whether it's people, quality, or whatever. So again, you start with the individuals. And now you say, well, in order to really fulfill that promise, to challenge them, to champion them, to celebrate them, to allow them those growth opportunities, you have to implement something that we call global depth. Global depth says that rather than thinking about, a typical way that, some competitors will think about their teams worldwide is there's the US folks and then there's the offshore guys or the nearshore guys. We really tried to eradicate that terminology, those words from our vocabulary. We prefer to say our colleagues in Colombia, and even sometimes our colleagues in Medellin, our colleagues in Nagpur, India, our colleagues in Cluj-Napoca, Romania. And we do that so that we start to, it's those subtle things that starts to create this peer-to-peer thinking about a colleague, that a colleague in the US is sitting in Chicago, Illinois, that is a technical architect, is at a peer level with that technical architect that is sitting in Bogota, or in Montevideo. And by doing that, you then start promoting the fact that your leadership doesn't have to be in a particular country, and that in fact, we demand upon ourselves that we grow entire pyramids all the way to the architects, program managers, directors of large program directors. That talent exists in every single location that we operate. So we don't have a delivery center that I would say is just totally commoditized, hands-on keyboard writing code. I don't think it wouldn't be fair to our people, but more importantly, it would undermine our differentiation with our competitors who maybe do commoditize certain people. Quite frankly, we hire quite a bit from, which I'm not going to name their names because I don't even want to give them press, but a lot of our large competitors, they rarely are able to hire people away from us. And when people come here, I just had a conversation with Monica the other day, and she came from a large competitor, and I said, why did you choose to come here? And she said, they made me a promise to help me grow, and they didn't keep that promise. And I said, Monica, I can assure you we will keep that promise because that's part of our value system. And again, this sounds simple, but to really make not only that commitment on paper, but to keep that commitment on a day-to-day basis is hard. It's hard to change people's perspective, especially people in the US that sometimes have been brainwashed into thinking that you can't have somebody who is as adept in creativity or architecture or program leadership in, say, Chennai, India, as you can in, Denver, Colorado. And so overcoming that requires commitment. But once you do, the power of that, the leverage of, our 7,500 colleagues worldwide across, like I said, 11 countries is really amazing. It's really amazing what they can come together and do as a collection of that, as a sum of all of those parts. So that's, I would say, our first level of differentiation that we have, and the most important is those people. But also, too, is how we structure teams and how we form teams with global depth. We could talk about, how we invest in training and certifications. We could talk about our software partners, such as Adobe and Salesforce. But those things are almost like a given. I truly think our biggest differentiation is how we treat our teams and the way that we have built out true global depth in the digital space.
Well, I think that is really special because you're trying to make people feel like part of something really big, something really deep. And it's a hard job because there are over 7,000 colleagues all over the world that expect that, and I know they feel that. So that makes me wonder, how do managed services and QA fit into our high quality services?
So I was thinking about this a little bit, and they're two very different things, and they fit in similarly, but for different reasons. So let's start with QA. I think a lot of, and this gets to your previous question about differentiation, I think a lot of companies look at QA, a lot of our customers sometimes look at QA as something that's commoditized. They've kind of written it off as, well, it's just, add more QA people and people just kind of pressing a button and manually testing things. And I think that works. It's kind of a brute force approach. We tend to look at QA and how do we differentiate QA? And how do we take that to another level? And you do that in a number of ways. So one is you incorporate kind of leading edge thoughts, or maybe not so leading edge, but maybe leading edge for a lot of customers is, the focus on automated QA and really thinking about automation, not just of test cases, but automation of how you, steward, act as a steward of the data, how you automate, say, obfuscation of that data, to make it safer. From a privacy perspective, how do you use and able to consume more production data? But how do you automate all of that process more and more? Because the more you can automate, the less people you need pressing buttons. But more importantly, even though that automation might cost you a little bit more upfront as an investment, that automation allows you to move a lot faster in between releases to production. So again, how we fit in with that matters more on the fact that we look at how do we make a differentiated QA offering in shortening your time to production and also ensuring the consistency of what gets delivered. Another technology within QA that I think is more leading edge is around AI. And how do you use AI to start generating test cases to tie back between requirements and test cases a little bit more seamlessly and frictionlessly. But how do you incorporate that into building a better QA environment? And then it's, again, as I talked about data stewardship, there's this idea of applying QA to being quality in an entire program. Like, how do you apply quality assurance to the entire program of getting your software, your idea, all the way through development and all the way into production? I think modern software development makes too much a distinction of QA as kind of a separate thing, when really, as Agilists, we tend to think of QA as being a natural part of the development process. Even some QA that's being done by developers, for those of us that are long-term Agilists. I understand that's not always popular, and I understand we have to adapt to customer perspectives, but by bringing some of that thought leadership in, by bringing, for example, talking to a customer about, well, tell me about how you articulate a requirement, and they drop a big use case deck on your, a big pile of use cases on your desk, you say, okay, that's one way to do it. Here are some downsides with doing it that way, as opposed to, say, using user stories, starting with epics, boil that to user stories, and then filling in the gaps as you get closer and closer to that sprint that you're going to actually execute or implement those user stories. Well, all of that process, we consider that quality assurance of the program, as opposed to, I think, again, some people think of QA as just being at the end. So it's something I'm really passionate about. We actually have some people that think about this way more than I do, and that would be great to talk to within Perficient, to talk about some of these leading edge and way that we differentiate QA. But that is really how it fits into what we do. We do complex digital experience type projects, and in order to do those types of complex projects, we really try to take every aspect of that, including QA, and make that differentiated, make that different than the norm. Now on to your other one, the other one you asked about, which is managed services.
Yep.
So managed services, we kind of, fell into or kind of were backed into being able to provide managed services. And I'm talking about, 12 years ago, 13, 14 years ago. More and more, we would deliver a project to a customer, and they were really happy with the work. And they would say, hey, we want you to support, can you also support this for a while we, ramp up the support of our team to be able to understand fully what you've been able to implement. And we did that, and we would do it. We weren't very structured at it. And so our customers, I think, were pretty happy, but we weren't structured. And so we ended up, kind of over delivering. And again, this gets down to the individual. We put a lot of developers in positions of supporting, applications. And I don't think that works as well either. First of all, you want people that have more of an operational mindset, but you also need to fulfill some things that, especially as we've gotten bigger, customers come to expect with managed services. Things around, key performance indicators, SLAs associated with, time to repair, mean time to get it back out in production, response times, all of that. Even back to like tier one, tiered support, where at your tier one support, you've got cloud-based system or a cloud-based system that's handling all of the incoming call and routing it properly, and then seamlessly moving that up through the stack of tier 2, tier 3, and even tier 4. And so through the last decade or so, we have put that in place, and we've created a service offering around managed service that is, again, what I think is really well thought out, differentiated, and something that we feel pretty proud of, and that we can now bring to our customers of say, of course, not only can we support the things that we've done, we can support things that other competitors have done or that you may have done in-house with a world-class service offering around managed services.
Well, I guess a really big part of that experience it's based on really listening to the client, to the customer. So that makes me wonder, like, in what ways does Perficient help its clients navigate cost pressures while maintaining high service standards across regions?
So quite a while ago, we came up with a concept we called optimized global delivery. And what that means is bringing the right skill, in the right place, the right time to a project. Now, right skill is not just all technologies. The right skill could be a business analyst, it could be a tester, it could be a developer, it could be a program manager. Right place is a little obvious. That's, do you want them on site, working hand in glove with the customer or the business user? Or can they be down the street in a different city, in a different country, in a different place on the planet? And right time has kind of two meanings to us. So the first is, which time zone are they in? So for example, if you have somebody who is a program manager for a very large program, and they're having to work with the customer who is in the US on a regular basis, like day in, day out, really hand in glove, it's difficult to have them in a different time zone. I mean, we even see it's difficult for somebody on the East Coast to work with somebody on the West Coast in that regard. So time is important. And there are certain roles that are more oriented, certain skills that are better oriented towards being in, say, India for a US customer versus Europe versus Latin America versus in the US, just because of that time zone. But more importantly, optimized global delivery recognizes the fact that projects themselves have a life cycle. And there are different times in that project where having that person, that skill, close to the client, closer to the client, closer to the project team or the business unit here in the US is more important. And as you go through the life cycle of that project, maybe that role doesn't have to be as close. Maybe it can be in Latin America. Maybe it can be in India even. And so recognizing that projects are dynamic things and they change. And so right skill, right place, right time also means the right time in that project. Where are you at in that project's life cycle? Because that optimization is going to shift, along its three axes, skill, place, and time, depending on where you're at in the project. And because of that, getting back to your thought about cost optimization, optimized global delivery is all about that optimization. Because what may cost more at the beginning of a project, you don't necessarily need everybody as close to the project or in the US or even in Latin America. As you start moving through that, you can maybe have them separated by time zone, and that causes costs to go down. So optimizing cost means recognizing that projects are living things and that they go through an evolution as they progress through their life cycle. And in fact, most of that is even a lot of projects are cyclic. Like there are certain periods of time where maybe you might want to have the talent a little bit more centralized. And then there are other parts of that project's life cycle as it moves that they become more dispersed. And then they come back and have to be more centralized again at certain parts of that. And so this oscillation of it is all part of what we call optimized global delivery. And that helps us not just, spec out a project up front with the team and expect that team is going to stay exactly the same throughout the life of the project. That's the lazy way to do it. We're constantly looking at how do we optimize that team throughout that life cycle of the project.
That's awesome, because we are talking about different regions, different cultures, people from all across the world working on several projects. What type of challenges do companies face when scaling their operations globally? And how does Perficient model helps address those challenges?
So I actually think your question raised probably the first thing I would say is where that people overlook. So a lot of times companies don't look at really embracing and understanding the diversity of the teams that they've now committed to. So the minute you say that you want part of your team in India, the minute you say that, hey, I want my part of team in Latin America, and this gets back to differentiation again too, is you really have to embrace the cultures in those locales and figure out how you are going to not just integrate the team from a technical perspective, from a logistical perspective, but from a cultural perspective. And I will tell you, the way to integrate that team from a cultural perspective is not to put our US blinders on and say, well, we're just going to have everybody, I'm just going to expect everybody is going to respond to and be a team member without paying attention to their own cultural diversity. So I think the worst thing that any customer or that even we could do is putting on our cultural blinders and saying, hey, we're going to take a US perspective and I just expect everyone worldwide to conform to the culture, the way of doing things that I've established using a US team, a US-centric team. Now, you could certainly do that, and you can certainly probably find some people for short periods of time that are willing to do that, that are willing to orient themselves, but I think that's becoming less and less likely that you're going to be able to find the best talent. Because the best talent that's out there is really looking for somebody that appreciates them, not only for the skills that they bring, not only for the work that they can do, but that diversity of perspective that they also bring. I draw this akin a little bit to maybe a simplified model where in the US, we went through this whole period of time, and I think there's some people still stuck in it around generational gaps. And so you have your boomers and your Gen Xers and your millennials and now your Gen Zers. And there's, they go back and forth with each other. And I hear managers doing this, even saying like, oh, well, and I don't even know which it is millennials that are lazy or Gen Zers, I can't recall. And they start going on and on about it. And my response to that is, well, first of all, that's a generalization. and you're better off really adapting yourself to the individual. And then secondly, so what are you going to do with that? Are you just going to write off an entire generation of people? You know, well, I would draw that. I'll draw a parallel to, you know, say working in India or working throughout Latin America. You could certainly sit there and say, you know, well, you know, people in Latin America aren't going to work as hard as people on the East Coast in the U.S. And I'm like, okay, I know plenty of people in Latin America that work just as hard or harder. I know plenty of people on the East Coast that don't work too hard. And so, you know, it almost gets better off not trying to generalize when you're trying to deal with teams, but really trying to get the individual team members to know, establish kind of a joint culture that you think, or an intersection of culture, that whole team can participate. And then you will truly have like the very best team. You will truly have people who feel valued, and you're going to have a team that's operating optimally, you know, in that. If you go through, you're free not to do that. And I think there's a lot of customers that do, that say, I want to use Latin America, or I want to use India because of the cost savings. And I think they're missing out. I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes, is not embracing that cultural diversity in building your team out with a model that really maximizes everybody's potential and gets the most out of your entire team.
That's great, because that is one part of the puzzle. And at Perficient, we for sure have like the greatest teams, the greatest experts. So what about the other part of the puzzle? Can you please provide some examples of how Perficient clients gain a competitive edge?
Sure. I think there's probably three main ways that we help clients gain that edge. Because we're always investing in our people. We're always investing in leading edge technology. So number one, we can help clients that maybe, you know, whether it's where they're at in their agile journey, whether it's where they're at with technology, we can help them leapfrog from where they're at today to where they need to be by providing teams that are already upskilled in those technologies that they're looking for. And then through the process, we're going to also impart a lot of that technical knowledge, which we've made the investment, and that's what we're bringing is the thought leadership to their team, so that when we leave with them with a team that is upskilled in those technologies as well. The second way that we can help them is similarly, because we're always keeping up on those technologies. If they need a quick injection of a particular technology into their project, we can bring those experts in, inject that technology in the project where it's needed, do the thought leadership and transition to their teams or the rest of the team, and then we can leave. And they don't have to make those same investments in massive investments in certification and partnering with software firms and things like that. And then the third way is when it comes to variability that naturally occurs in the life cycles of projects and work that needs to get done. So, customers should always be thinking about having a certain amount of what I would call variable workforce, about, as they need to ramp up very quickly, we can come in and bring a lot of people to bear, get through that workload or that technical debt that needs to get completed. And then you could ramp the team back down to something that's more in a core, that's more sustainable from a budgetary perspective until you need that next ramp up. Now, if a customer tries to do that, and this may seem obvious, but a customer tries to do that by hiring and then laying people off all the time, that's obviously going to create a reputation in the market, which is not so great. We don't really, when people roll off of a particular customer, they're going on to work on another project somewhere. And so we can manage that variable workforce, and that customer can leverage us for those things. They do all of this through really a variety of different models and ways that we help customers. So we do all this through a variety of different models. The simplest is customer says, hey, I've got this piece of work that I need someone to go off and do. And so we come in with those experts, we come in with the preformed teams, we take that work, we go off and do that, and maybe even we continue in an outsourced capacity where we're delivering on that over and over again for months, years, however long the customer wants. And at some point they may say, we want to transition that in back more steady state to us. We go through that transition and then we turn that back over. There are customers where we continue to be their outsourced delivery arm for large pieces of the business, and we're very good at doing that. It's a very workable model for us. There are other models that are more kind of pod based, where a customer says, I don't know the work that I'm going to do exactly, but I need capacity, I need pods that are going to be going off and delivering different pieces of the business or different parts of a project. And so we can build those pods, and quite often those pods are melded between us, customers, and sometimes either other providers. So it's a very interwoven type of pod-based model that's very different than outsourced. It's more capacity-based, and it's more woven together or more integrated with the customer's folks. And then there's strategic staffing types of things where we come in and they say, hey, I need somebody who's an expert in this, or I need a team that can, or people that can weave into this team and really fill it out to the capacity it needs to be, whether that's a pod, whether that's a larger team. And those are kind of places where we play as well, and that a model that we're very comfortable with customers as well. So again, completely outsourced models, woven together, more structured pod models, and even strategic staffing to help customers augment their teams, their already well-formed teams, into even more powerful teams, bringing in that thought leadership, bringing in expertise that they need, and sometimes just bringing in capacity to be able to get things done, whether it's implementing a new technology or trying to transform their QA organization into something that's faster, more optimized, and better delivering.
Yeah, and I think that the key part about that is like finding out what are the necessities of the customer, of the business that needs us. Kind of hear it out and learn about them and provide with the right solution at the right time, at the right place. Thank you so much, Kevin. This was really informative, and we really appreciate you joining us and everyone who is watching. So please stay connected with Perficient, the leading global consultancy that is changing the world of tech. Thank you.